This lecture is about teaching genius. Now that we understand a little bit more about the cognitive abilities of dogs, how they relate to other species, and really what makes them remarkable in terms of their social cognition and how they use us to solve problems, can we use that information to actually help train dogs to do all sorts of things that we hope that they would do to either make them good citizens, to make them great members of our family, or even to really be working dogs, working in society and doing all sorts of jobs for us. So in terms of the book, if you're following along with the book, then it's going to be chapter 10 that's going to be most relevant. And Cognition, obviously everything that you could learn about your dog's cognitive profile could be relevant here, depending on whether your dog is a dog that has good or reliant on their memory or not, or whether they use your gestures or not, or if they're particularly cunning. That could be important to know as you're trying to come up with strategies to train them. So here's I think what we associate with training dogs is a little clicker. You have this little plastic box and there's a metal tab in it. You depress it and it makes a sound. This is used by lots of different animal trainers to train lots of different species. To train animals, to shape their behavior, to slowly teach them to do something you might want them to do, whether it's a job or just because it would be entertaining for them to do whatever it is you're training to do. And I think what's really fascinating is when we went in to write the book, The Genius of Dogs, I just assumed there was a healthy literature on clicker training in dogs where it had been demonstrated that clicker training actually is a super effective method to speed up training of dogs, to have what you teach them last longer, etc., because there's so many trainers who really believe in clickers. Now, I'm not suggesting that they're wrong, but I was surprised to learn that there is really not a healthy literature at all on the impact of clicker training in training. So if clickers do work, it would be really neat to demonstrate that and to understand exactly what they do. The one paper that I did find, it was just a small sample of dogs, but it did suggest that there really wasn't a big difference between using a clicker or just praising a dog and telling them good job in terms of the speed with which those dogs learned or for the length that they learned what it was you were trying to teach them. So given that training is still a bit of an art, and I don't mean that in any way but as a compliment, because if I was asked to train a dog to sort of help them with their problem behaviors, if a dog was really aggressive, or there was a dog that wasn't getting along with other dogs, or maybe it kept going to the bathroom in the house, I have no clue what to do. I'm not a dog trainer. I've trained my own dogs, but to solve other people's dog problems, oh my goodness. So I am very humble around dog trainers. But at the same time, what I would hope is that the science that we've generated about dog cognition and psychology might be useful in taking what is an amazing art form and moving it even further, where trainers will have more tools to more powerfully train even more effectively than they already are. So the reason that I bring up the study with the clicker is that I think science can really help, and I want to just really quickly talk about the history of the clicker, because it comes from actually an approach that is not what I would consider part of the cognitive approach to dog behavior. So behaviorism was really a very different way to think about animal psychology and animal behavior. Behaviorism was originally founded by people like J.B. Watson and Thorndike and B.F. Skinner, and really dominated the American psychological establishment throughout the 1950s to 60s and even 70s. B.F. Skinner was the most famous behaviorist, and when people were asked in the 70s to name the top three most famous scientists, B.F. Skinner was always named. He was on Time magazine's cover, named the last scientist that's been on the cover of Time magazine. And so this was somebody who really had a big impact on science in the United States, and behaviorism really became within psychology, the dogma of the time. Now, the argument or the thinking behind behaviorism is that all behavior is really reducible to some very simple, relatively simple psychological mechanisms or learning mechanisms where basically through conditioning, an individual responds to a stimulus, and if the response leads to a positive outcome, then they will generate that response increasingly to the presence of a stimulus. There are a couple of different types of conditioning. There's classical and operant conditioning, and the idea is that these two mechanisms really could explain almost everything. Now, there was absolutely elegant work done to demonstrate that these two mechanisms really do exist. They are totally replicable and very important for animal learning. Famously, the Skinner box was invented where animals were put in a box and they could be given different what are called schedules of reinforcement. They could be taught different things, and because it was so controlled in the Skinner box, there was really nothing but lights or buttons that the animal might depress. That there's no way that other variables could interfere with the experiments, and they were extremely well controlled. And this is really where positive reinforcement training comes from, and really where the clicker method comes from. If there's a stimulus and you get the right response, that then you can condition dogs to do all sorts of things, shape their behavior, and really they don't necessarily need to understand anything, but through these very simple conditioning mechanisms, you can get dogs to do a whole host of behaviors without even understanding what they're doing, why they're doing what they're doing.